Hi, welcome back to the Biblical Preaching Podcast. Hello, Michael.
Hi, greetings.
Okay, so we're going to think a little bit about how to plan a series. Okay, so you've got a series of Sundays and you want to preach through a book or a section of a book. Where do you start? What's the thought processes? How do you avoid it being too long or too boring or too repetitive? Let's chat.
Yeah. Where do you start? Like, when you're thinking of series, are you starting with what book of the Bible do you feel like preaching next? Are you thinking there's a particular need in church? I mean, maybe it's all of those things together, but is there a general rule that you have or principle?
I think there's kind of an initial. There's no point thinking hypothetically of everything if there are constraints. Okay, so you can dream of having a 6-month series, but if you've got a 2-month gap, it doesn't matter. And so if you've got Christmas or Easter, that's already constraining you. You know, it's not the time to be midway through Kings.
Yeah.
You know, that there may be some Kings involved, but not the Book of Kings. And so, you know, if it's an Easter series, if it's a Christmas series, if there's something like that, then obviously you're already quite a distance along in the preparation process. But let's say you've just got this kind of very blank slate. Then I think you do say, okay, what does the church need? What do I feel like preaching? What would be good in terms of balance over the course of, what have we had recently? So in our church at the moment, we've just been having this discussion amongst the leadership, and we've been saying, okay, well, we've had quite a lot of epistles recently, and there was one series in the Gospels, but apart from that, it's been mostly epistles for a few months. Next series probably shouldn't be epistles. Could well not be gospel, so where do we go? Yeah. So therefore, we're sort of narrowing down into sections of narrative. Do we go Old Testament? Do we go Book of Acts? What does the church need? And so we can sort of elimination process. And along the way, there will be some things where you say, well, that probably would be a good series, but we don't have the energy to preach it or to prepare for it, or it just doesn't seem the right thing right now. So keep a note of that, and we'll come back to that one later.
Yeah. So you're thinking and discussing all of these things quite a way ahead. So you're trying to plan series 6 months minimum, or about kind of 6 months ahead of time, but you're not planning a series for next month in that kind of sense.
Normally not.
Yeah, no. In a normal situation.
That's right. Ideally, you want to have a little bit of lead time, because the benefit of the lead time is that it gives you time to collect resources, to make notes of things. Sometimes you hear something, you think, oh, that'd be great for the series coming up in the autumn, in the fall. It's several months away, but I've heard it now. If the series is starting next week, the pressure's on.
Yeah.
You've got to find the stuff quick.
Yeah. And particularly kind of if people are sort of sole pastors in their church, that lead time is prep time. There's a sense of needing to prepare. If you're doing a book of the Bible or a section of a book, you need to give yourself time to immerse yourself in that book or in that genre as much ahead of time as you can get.
As you're preparing for a series, you're thinking a whole series as well as individual messages.
Right.
And so if I'm planning a series and it's starting a week from Sunday, I want to be thinking about first message, but I've also got to be thinking about how does the whole thing work. And so I'm almost doing two things at the same time, which is why it's best not to squeeze that.
Yeah, exactly. So before we'll talk more about some things about how to think about preaching a series and coming up with series, but just one slightly more distant question is, why have series at all? So if we're thinking question about, you want to pick a sermon series or message series because of some of the needs of the church, why not just do that every Monday? And maybe some people do that.
Some people do, yeah.
And maybe there's advantages to that in terms of, I'm just trying to think of one quickly, but just in terms of there's a real immediate kind of speaking into issues, but actually, we
do need to have the flexibility, and so in favour of that is the flexibility argument, right? So here's an issue that came up yesterday. Next Sunday, I'm going to address it.
Yeah.
So being able to do that is really helpful. Doing it all the time might feel like, in theory, wow, we're going to be so, fresh. The reality is you're probably going to end up saying the same thing a lot.
Yeah.
Don't you think? You sort of, your own hobby horse, your own favorite passage, your own application. Like, I think you'll end up kind of sounding very samey, even though it will look on paper quite scattered.
And even that scattered approach is sometimes, I think, for people that are, like, for one-offs it's okay, but for people that are having that diet of just quote unquote random, jumping around, kind of random thing, I think it's really hard just to hang on to the truth that you're saying. I think you're right. There really would be a danger of just saying the same thing, but
you'll end up with scattered Christians. I think that's the biggest issue. Is if you're giving a scattered diet, you'll get scattered Christians, and yeah, you'll end up preaching the same passages. You'll tend to go to the ones that seem most preachable, and therefore you'll avoid ones that seem difficult. So that there'll be an imbalance in terms of your own study, in terms of the diet of the congregation. And then you'll kind of wish you were in a series sometimes when the thing you want to speak about, you can't just say, well, I want to speak about it.
Yeah.
Like, we need to address money, or we need to address some specific issue that's brewing in the church, some difficulty, gossip or whatever. If you choose to preach on it, and then the next Sunday you preach on it, it's very in your face, and people know that you've chosen to preach about it. Whereas if you do a series, and in the midst of that series it addresses money, like 2 Corinthians, once you get to chapters 8 and 9, well, we're doing 2 Corinthians, and so you don't have to apologize, you just preach it. But in doing so, you're landing the truth of the Bible on a subject that maybe people could be defensive about if they think you've chosen it.
Right. And in all the things we'll talk about how you can plan series and think through stuff. I think sometimes, well, maybe every series, but it can often be the case that the things that you don't plan for, that God gives you during a series, there can be particular chapters or passages that, God knows are going to come in week 4 and 5, because that's how, quote unquote, you've planned it. Yeah. But he knows actually,
that's what's needed.
In 4 or 5 weeks' time, you're going to need that chapter, and you would never have chosen it normally. But actually, the amount of times I can think, we or people in our church have had conversations, and we're like, this chapter is so relevant, and it's almost like it's random because it's just the next chapter in a week. But actually, there's something that God does, even in and with and through our planning, which is why it's never just planning on its own. There's prayer and there's conversation, of course. Just to say that, in case we don't say that later, say that now. It's not just this is our plan, but actually the Lord works through. I think can really work through. So we're not. I don't think either of us feel like in planning series we ever are constraining God and His word. Because actually, if you preach His word, that's not constrained.
And also, I think, from the perspective of, if you say, okay, starting point, no planning whatsoever, just go week by week, has the advantage of flexibility, but the disadvantages we've listed. You don't want to go to the opposite extreme and say, okay, I've planned the next 5 years and there's no wiggle room.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that it's Christmas, or it doesn't matter that, our country has been attacked, or it doesn't matter that, this major thing has happened in our town, or this significant situation has happened in the church, because our next section is 2 Kings 7 or whatever. And it's not that we're saying be rigid, we're saying planning and then holding it with a sort of, not a loose grip so that it's getting knocked about, but with a loose enough grip so that where needed you can be flexible and say, we're going to interrupt that series because we're at war. Like that would be very appropriate.
Exactly. And some people would defend that and say it's we've got a really high view of the word, and so we don't deviate from preaching the next week. But actually, I think it can just show a really low view of preaching, and also a low view of God speaking to people in real life. Because it's like, because if something is happening and you're just saying, well, we trust God's word and it's the next chapter, like, well, that's fine. Yeah. But actually, it's not really fine.
There was a study, I forget where it was, but someone did a study of what was preached after the Sunday after 9/11 in American churches, and it was shocking how many churches did not address the fact that they'd just been attacked.
Wow.
And the numbers attending church swelled massively that Sunday.
Yeah.
People are coming, they're wanting to hear something that's going to be relevant, and you're just ploughing on with your series in a drone. That's a disaster. So we want to have the flexibility to address issues, but at the same time the steady diet which comes from series upon series, because then you get different Bible books, different genre, a balanced diet over the course of 2 years or 5 years or whatever a reasonable season is. If it was down to me, we would be in John and Hebrews, all the time.
Every week, yeah.
But actually it's good for me and it's good for my church to be in other epistles and to be in Old Testament prophets and to be in different sections of the Bible. And so by having series, we can kind of take stock and say, okay, well, we've not been in this area for a while. Is there something here that might meet the need that we're feeling pastorally for the congregation?
So with all that being said, then, so what does go through your mind in terms of where to go in a series? How are you trying to connect church needs, church diet with actual open Bible?
I think it's an interesting question. I think that the conversations that I'm in, the leaders we have in our church, we've got a commitment to the Bible being good, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, how can we find a text to force our message? We start with, this is what we feel we need, kind of loose sense. Then we sort of look at Bible sections or books, what might be a good fit, what might be something reasonably different from what we've had recently. Once we settle on a Bible book, the book takes over. It's not that our agenda is driving how we read it.
That's exactly right.
It's that, wow, we suddenly start getting really excited. Okay, we're preaching 2 Timothy, we're preaching Zephaniah, whatever it is. It's that text that then drives the series, not our agenda.
Yeah. So if we're thinking in church that evangelism in general in church is weaker than it should be, or if there's what the situation in the church are there similar situations that are addressed in the Bible? So maybe to evangelism, we kind of think it through Acts, or if there's perhaps one of the issues is sort of courage and boldness to live for the Lord, or okay, where is that kind of thing addressed? But then it's not. Then every week is not that reverse engineering. It's like maybe the issues that are brought up in Acts are really relevant for us as a church right now. For example, okay, we're going to do Acts or these bits in Acts. Okay, great, do Acts.
Yeah.
Like, don't just do that as a theme, but that's kind of how you can get there. And then you kind of work through. And another important thing is thinking through how long you want the series to be. So I think most people's default will just be, well,
as long as it takes.
We'll do Acts and we'll start at chapter 1 and we'll go to the end, or we'll do whatever. We'll start at the beginning and go to the end. But at least in our church, we don't always do that. So sometimes we do go from a beginning to end, but typically we don't. Yes, like what issues are there?
It depends on the length of book. If a book is short, then we'll do the whole thing.
Yeah.
If a book is long, rather than having a series that is multiplied, multiple times what you would do for a shorter book, we'll still do a reasonable length series. We tend to think 4 to 8, 6 to 8 is sort of typical ideal. Sometimes we'll go as low as 4. Sometimes we go up as high as 10 or 12.
Yeah.
But we really don't go beyond that.
Yeah.
And so if a book cannot be done in that length, we'll do a part of it.
Yeah.
And then come back and do the next part.
That's right. It's almost like it's like a series within a book. So if there's a thematic or just kind of sections of a book, whether it's kind of within a gospel, you can kind of have sections of teaching, or in epistles there'll be particular sections within the epistle, or particular characters within a story. We did one summer, didn't we? We did the life of Abraham.
Yeah.
So
that was a longer one.
We want to go to Genesis, but we don't do the whole of Genesis. So let's focus in on Abraham. And he said that was sort of a whole summer, wasn't it? And a bit extra, yeah. And so thinking through, well, is there a series within this text or within this bit of the story.
I mean,
That's
just take
important.
Genesis. You could very easily do a series in Genesis 1 to 11, similar length through the life of Abraham. You could do a shorter series with Isaac
Yeah,
if you wanted to.
yeah, yeah.
A decent chunk on Jacob and a decent chunk on Joseph. That's 4 or 5 series.
Yeah.
But if you try to do Genesis as one series, the problem is that somewhere along the way, people start talking about it not in terms of, oh, I'm loving the series, but, oh, we're still in this series.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And just that little change of tone makes a huge difference in terms of the feel of the church. When you've got people saying to each other, oh, we're still doing this, they're not motivated to be there, they're not motivated to listen, they're not motivated to bring someone. Whereas if you contrast that with, oh, coming soon, this new series title, whatever it is, that sounds good, I'll invite my friend.
Yeah.
And that series runs its course, 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever. And then coming soon, new series. It's a chance to kind of have that preview, anticipation, excitement, new energy, new leadership, new direction. The setting the tone for the series is a place where you can be setting the tone for the church. And so, yeah, I just feel the benefits of starting series is so significant that I don't want to have a series that's dragging.
Yeah, that's really important, because actually how you communicate to the church and how you start a series. Yeah, we talk when we're teaching about preaching. We're talking about how important introductions are to a message,
Yeah.
and are not always given the time it deserves. But then, even in kind of more macro, is well, giving time to introducing a series. So the first launch of a series might not actually be, Acts chapter 1 in a series on Acts 1 to whatever. It might be not outside of Acts, but something that's sort of a bit more
Could be.
high level view, or there's ways to do it. But that's a really important thing to say, is actually how you launching is not just starting a series. It's communicating, like, why are we doing this? Why should I be excited about this coming series? What are we hoping?
And I think therefore you're touching on something really good there, that we're not obligated to simply take the text, whatever the passage, chunk, book, whatever it is that we're doing the series in. We're not obligated to put that on a table and then just cut it evenly.
Yeah.
And say, right, well, that's going to take 6 weeks, so that's a 6-week series. It may be that you, before you even get to dividing it up, I would say you need to say, okay, so in light of the book, having studied the book and thought about the book, this Bible section that we're dealing with, what's going to make it a coherent series? Okay, what's the why of this series? Because books contain a lot of details, and if all you do is kind of rapid fire random details at people, it's not going to be good preaching. It's true in a message, it's also true in a series. So what's going to make the series feel coherent, like that unifying series long thrust, that needs to be clarified. And then you say, okay, in light of that, how do we achieve it?
Yeah.
So for example, a series we're thinking about in our church, we did Acts 1 to 10, sort of the first third, or 1 to 12, I can't remember what it was, a few years ago. Then we did the missionary journeys, which is sort of 13 to 19, 20, somewhere in there. But then we've never done 20 to the end. Okay, so how do we now, with the church being different, new people in the church, how do we suddenly start at the end of a book?
Yeah, right.
So the first message has to cover some ground.
Yeah.
And so Acts 1 to 20 in a message, that's going to be a fun challenge. But it's really to kind of create momentum so that when we get to Acts 21 and start moving through it, there's a sense of people are with us.
Yeah.
People are like leaning forward. What's going to happen? Rather than kind of scratching their heads thinking, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, like it's giving context. Context isn't, whatever you're preaching, you need to know and give the context of the passage. But it's more than just the context of the passage; it's the context of this series, and to do that well. And I'm probably often so. If you're having not everyone will have multiple preachers in a series. Some will just have kind of one because that's they have one preacher. But when you're having when you're having multiple preachers through a series, they need to certainly know and definitely be on board with the direction,
the unity of
the whole series, because it's and I really value that, like with us, is that every week, even if it's, yeah, just two people preaching through the series, they're referring to each other. Not just last week we heard this, but actually 2 weeks ago when we started, we would set up with this, and that has the consistency then of a series. But then, therefore, if the introduction is important, how you finish the series is, again, because you're not just finishing and kind of
fizzle.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. I wasn't quite sure what noise that made, but yeah, like actually finishing it well is important, but probably quite hard, because maybe by the time you get to the end, you're thinking, well, thank goodness that's finished. But again, what's kind of going through your guys as you think, okay, how do we finish? How do we land this well? Because then you're partly thinking, well, the week after we land this one, we're starting a new one.
New energy for the new one.
But yeah, that's fine. But then it's kind of like landing it, like I say, with energy. Yeah,
I think it's worth thinking about the series. Keep in mind, okay, what's the point of the whole thing? What's the why of the series? Yeah. And then, okay, how many weeks are we going to take? And so you say, okay, what would it naturally feel like? Would it naturally fall into 7, 8 sections, whatever? Okay, do we have 7, 8? Actually, we have 10. Okay, well, that allows us wiggle room for an intro and a conclusion that isn't using up time in the passage itself. It could do. We could just dip in. It could overview. We could go to background to set it up. Whatever. There's options, but you want to be thinking, okay, how do we start it? How do we finish it? If it's a longer series, do we need a midpoint message that kind of reviews and previews without just being review and preview? So if you're working your way through Ephesians, say, and you're taking a longer time, you're not doing it in 6, that's mad. Okay, it's 6 big chapters, probably a 12-week series potentially at least. But if you're taking, 10, 12 or even longer, okay, so what do we do when we get to the end of chapter 3? Because if we just keep sort of ploughing on into chapter 4, we've missed a moment there, because the end of 3, start of 4 is this huge hinge. Maybe we should make a message about the hinge. Maybe that next message is actually about Acts 4 verse 1. It's about that, therefore walk in a manner worthy. What is he saying? And then the following week, 4, 1 to 16 might be your text. Do you see what I mean? So it doesn't have to be even that you're just going chunk by chunk. But sometimes you say, okay, this is a strategic moment in the series. We're going to intro, we're going to do a midpoint kind of hinge message, or we're going to do a concluding message. Those could be different. Or maybe you get to a passage where you say, this is so important, we're going to do the passage as a whole 1 week, and the following week we're going to drill into a single verse within that passage. You've got flexibility in terms of how you do it.
Yeah.
You don't just have to go equal chunk, equal chunk, equal chunk. You can, but you don't have to.
You can build in flexibility by adding blank weeks. So that's something which
very good idea.
Which we do, and which we talk about again in other places.
We've never regretted having a blank week in the plan.
No,
we've often regretted not having a blank week in a plan.
Because either you can do what you've just described that you don't realise beforehand that you needed to do, because if you plan everything kind of week to week to week, and then you get to, like you said, in chapter 4, and you think, oh man, we need to, and you almost can't. I mean, you always can actually, but just change it, just change the weeks. But actually building in some blanks can give you the space to say, okay, we can actually do things a bit creatively like that, or it gives you the space to address if there are issues or things happening in the world or in the city, you can do that. And if nothing in the series changes, if nothing in the world is happening, if there's no issues at all, you've got a free week and
preach Psalm 23.
You can preach whatever you want to. Other psalms are available,
That's right.
But that is a good one. Or opportunity to give someone else a go in the middle of a series. Maybe that have a breather and have someone else speak. If nothing happens and it's a blank week, there's opportunity to.
I would say more often than not, blank weeks are useful. I don't remember many times we've said, well, we've got a spare week, what should we do?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I remember the first series we did in our church, as we were starting the church 12 years ago, we did a series, I forget what it was now, but it was about 3 months long, and it was sort of cumulatively building, and we had a variety of speakers in that first series. And one particular week, the preacher didn't really do what fit the series,
Okay.
and it kind of became an issue. Like, we were sort of scratching our heads going, what do we do? And we had to push everything back and do another message,
Okay.
because otherwise, if we'd have just carried on, it was like there was this sort of series that was progressing, and then a message that just was something else. It didn't quite work. I mean, it wasn't. It was technically the next text, but we decided, no, let's adjust the series. That, you know, the person that themselves didn't know, and it wasn't you, don't worry. But the person didn't know that actually
Yeah,
we
that's what you
were
did.
frantically scrambling behind the scenes to sort
Yeah.
of rescue the series.
Yeah.
But having the buffer at the end of it allowed us to shift everything back into that buffer,
Right.
and sort of pick up the pieces and regenerate momentum, which does bring another kind of piece into the puzzle, and that is, if, like you said, some settings, one preacher, entire series, that's relatively straightforward. When you've got the option of multiple preachers, okay, so it could be a team of preachers, it could be that you have a main preacher and then others that step in once in a while, whatever it is, if you've got more than one person in a series, then you need to make sure the why is really clear, right? So that what's the goal of the series? How does each message fit within that? But then I would say it's worth thinking about, okay, which weeks are we putting other people in?
Right.
You know,
Okay.
like if, or to put it differently, how can we make sure that people are kind of in their area of strength
Okay.
within the series? Because you might have a series where you have a message that's sort of quite overview, survey, big picture. That's a different type of preaching strength than we're looking at 4 verses and we're really noting the details in it.
Yeah. Right.
You know, or setting a vision for a series takes maybe different skills. Landing a series with a real emphasis at the end takes a different skill. Handling a narrative section that's a bit more storytelling is different than handling a sort of a teaching section that's more didactic and detail
Yeah.
and structural. So
And even just content wise, if there are things in that come up in the series that are potentially controversial or just difficult to understand, you might just for kindness
don't throw someone into
for
that.
the preacher and you know, the preacher and the listeners. Yeah, there's a kindness in saying, well, actually, you know, we as leaders will, or the pastor, I will take that one because I know it's complicated, or I know it's
Complicated, controversial,
yeah.
takes leadership sensitivity. It's not the time
Yeah.
to throw someone who's doing their 3rd sermon. And, you know, you're trying to encourage them, trying to develop them.
Yeah.
Here, have a list of names.
Yeah.
You know, or here, deal with some sexual section that's really awkward.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so
Exactly.
yeah, we put people in a place where they can thrive within a series and work to people's strengths rather than just, well, you're up next.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
You know?
yeah. Pick a day and that's your day. Yeah, that's not kind of how. Yeah, very kind.
I think we've covered a lot. There's probably more we could say, but length of series, creativity in how you split up the passages, bit of wisdom in terms of who you plug in where. And also, if you have a team of 5 or 6 preachers, they don't have to be in this series. You could just use 2 or 3 for this series and save 2 or 3 for next series. I mean, that's perfectly legit as well. But yeah, I think it's exciting that the sense that over time, the church is getting a healthy diet is such a blessing.
Yeah, that has to be key.
Yeah. So there you go. Some thoughts on how to plan a series. Just as we finish, it's kind of maybe one of the most obvious Bible verses we've ever done. But Acts 20, Paul with the Ephesian elders, he says in verse 26, "Therefore I declare to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all of you, because I did not avoid declaring to you the whole plan of God." That whole counsel. Like, Paul tried to tell them everything, right? And if we're going to do that same thing, if we're going to feed our church over the course of 2 years or 5 years or whatever period of time makes sense for our own context, how can we make sure that we're not omitting genre, sections of the Bible, elements of truth? Well, I think series by series, Bible book or section of Bible book by section, we can put the pieces in, and hopefully as the Spirit works and as we preach, the whole counsel, the whole plan of God is being communicated.
That's
Amen.
a great place for us to finish, isn't it? I think. And if you have any other thoughts or comments about the series or anything more about preaching in general, do get in touch or write comments, and we love to read them and interact with you guys who are with us. But we're grateful again that you have been with us on another episode of the Biblical Preaching Podcast, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.